Hey everyone, welcome back to the 443 Security Simplified. I'm your host, Mark the Liberty, and joining me today is.
Corey Not Leaky Not Reiner.
Unlike Corey, today we'll be discussing a source code leak from a popular AI provider. We will then talk about a supply chain compromise that dang well might be the biggest one, or potentially the most wide impacting one that we've seen in a very long time. And then we will end with BrowserGate, a complaint filed by a bunch of folks over in the EU alleging that Microsoft is doing even more illegal things. With that, let's go ahead and, leak our way in. That sounds great. That doesn't sound good.
Trip our way in?
Yeah, perfect. So, Corey, I love AI coding software. Like, we've been trialing different types. We've got a couple of agreements internally at WatchGuard that some folks have access to, and it is freaking amazing. One thing I don't like about AI coding software is how expensive it is, though. So what would you do if I told you could get AI coding software for free?
Oh, God, I love it. I mean, how is that possible?
Well, last week, Anthropic published version 2.1.88 of Claude Code on the Node Package Management Index, NPM, with one very big oopsie along the way. They accidentally included what's called a source map file, which we'll get into in a second, which effectively leaked over 500,000 lines of code across 2,000 TypeScript source code files that make up the Claude Code application. TypeScript, it's a programming language that's built on top of JavaScript that adds like additional features, one of them being static type definitions, meaning like in normal JavaScript, a variable could be literally anything. It could hold a number, a string, an array, whatever. In TypeScript, you have to have tightly typed variables, like say this is a string, and if you try and put a array into it, it will throw an error. This is a list, and if you try and put a number into it, it will throw an error. It's to help you find and debug issues in code earlier in the process. TypeScript, it isn't compiled, it's transpiled, meaning it's translated to JavaScript before execution. And these source map files allow a debugger or like similar application to display the original TypeScript code in order to help find issues or troubleshoot issues. They are not meant to be included in public releases of TypeScript-based files because it is the source code. Big oopsie. Within hours, this source code was forked like tens of thousands of times across various GitHub repositories. Developers started taking hits at it. Like I saw a Rust port of it, so moving from TypeScript to Rust, which quickly became the fastest GitHub repository to receive over 100,000 stars ever. Other developers started finding and identifying like the source of bugs that they were running into with performance issues. Saw some reports that went into like a deep dive on how Claude Code manages its memory efficiently too. So it opened up a lot of like interesting stuff for hackers or hacker-minded people to see how it's working under the hood. But this is literally Anthropic's proprietary information on how the Claude Code system works on an endpoint. And while us white hat hacker folks are interested in seeing how things work under the hood, you can imagine how valuable this might be for a black hat hacker folk. That
surely they haven't noticed yet.
Exactly. But that's actually a good point. So cyber criminals are pretty quick to capitalize on all of this buzz too. They created malicious GitHub repositories that use the source code as a hook to trick people into downloading malware. There was one example where they claimed to be basically Claude Code rebuilt from the source code with all of the enterprise features unlocked and no messaging limits. It had a release attached to it. That release was a 7-zip archived file with an executable in it. The executable, despite being called Claude Code x64, was actually a Rust-based dropper that dropped either the Vidar info stealer or Ghost Socks proxy malware on endpoints. But this was a pretty big oopsie. Like, in reality, the confidentiality of your source code shouldn't dictate whether it's secure or not. but it is absolutely important for protecting intellectual property. And this exposed a lot of really clever, like actual useful intellectual property from Claude Code's perspective on like how they manage like context windows, and even expose some brand new features that are coming down the line. Like one researcher found a feature flag in there that turns on or off a experimental mode called dream mode that basically lets Claude Code just constantly think in the background and improve on ideas, even if you're not directly prompting it, like a true agent mode. Claude, or not Claude, but Anthropic started issuing DMCA takedown requests to try and take down all those forks. But when your code has been forked 20,000 times over the course of like half an hour, it's the cat's kind of out of the bag at
And
this
I'm
point.
sure it's been posted to other places besides just the original NPM. And yeah, it's going to be hard to take this down.
So I thought this was interesting for a couple of reasons. And so one of them was like we've had a lot of AI either assisted or AI created issues at some big companies lately. Like AWS had some outages that they at least partially attributed to their own AI usage internally. Meta had a what they called a severity one incident that exposed some customer information, at least internally in the company, that was caused by incorrect instructions given by their own internal AI to a developer. Now, Anthropic hasn't said this was like caused or not caused by their own agentic AI use internally, but you could see how what is really a simple mistake of like not including these source map files in a like git ignore file, like preventing them from getting uploaded to a repository like this. Like that's a pretty junior level oopsie in this case. And you could see how a junior level developer in the form of agentic AI could potentially make that kind of mistake. So I don't know. I feel like we're going to start seeing more of these kind of basic issues leading to source code leakage or leading to just data theft as more and more people do adopt artificial intelligence. I'm curious on your thoughts on that, Corey. Like, you think I'm jumping the gun a bit on blaming AI for this, or
maybe for blaming AI, but I do see as the more they automate things like this, the more potential there is for disaster. Yeah, I agree. And honestly, this type of data leakage is what we worry about most with using AI tools. And can you trust the vendors that are supplying AI enough to, when you have the right data agreements, not share your data, not share your training prompts, not share any information and use it in their own training, and yet they're leaking their own source code? It doesn't really give you the warm and fuzzies about, oh, great, I have this data processing agreement where you say you're not using my training data and you're not leaking it to other people, but you just leaked your own source code.
can't even manage your own house, right? Especially when like Anthropic claims that Claude Code at this point is almost entirely developed by Claude Code itself. And so there is a high likelihood that this was at least like AI assisted in this source code leak.
It makes sense. Yeah. I just listened to a podcast we might have talked about before where they had the guy that does AI policy that used to be part of OpenAI talking about how Claude is mostly Claude coded.
Yep.
Now.
And it was interesting seeing this immediately weaponized for phishing. Like it makes total sense. Like you're going to have millions of people that are like at least technology adjacent going, I want to see what the source code looks like, and then download malware instead because they don't know what they're looking at or what they're getting into.
By the way, it's not a story we're covering this time, but I might mention it in more detail when we start talking about supply chain attacks, and the biggest one you were talking about. But there was another big code leak this week too, and anytime there's a code leak like that, people need to be careful. I mean, I get the curiosity of seeing what's in the code leaks, but it is that perfect phishing thing, right? If you're not actually a coder yourself and can't read code, and someone's saying they've packaged up this thing for you from the leaked code, I would be very skeptical and very careful, as is already proven by Claude leak being used.
Rats.
It
reminds me of my childhood where I forgot which video game it was. It was probably like Halo 2 or something, where like before it came out, there was like this, oh, the source code's been leaked kind of thing. And me and my curiosity went looking for it and did not end up with the source code for that video game, but did end up with some nice other malware on my computer
Yeah.
because I had no idea what the hell I was doing because I was 13 years old. But
They're good at taking advantage of excitement and emotion. And anytime the tech industry sees something as big as a pretty high-end source code leak happen, it draws attention, and threat actors know how to leverage the psychology of attention.
yep. So if you are going to go looking for Anthropic source code for Claude Code, just be careful of where you're poking around.
Don't download executable.
Correct.
Read the source instead.
But even then, like as we've seen, downloading source code and then opening it up in an IDE and marking
yeah,
it as
that
trusted can be enough to kind of screw you as well. So just be careful if you're out there trying to satisfy your curiosity. And in the meantime, I'm looking forward to even more analysis of the source code and like interesting things we can learn from Anthropic's own engineering work, because they clearly know what the heck they're doing with managing AI agents, and it's been interesting so far. But moving on to what you were just hinting at, Corey. So last week, the ultra popular JavaScript package called Axios, with over 100 million weekly downloads, suffered a supply chain compromise that lasted for about 3 hours or so. During this time, a threat actor used a compromised maintainer's account to publish two tainted releases, version 1.14.1 and version 0.30.4, which included what's called a post-install hook, basically something that runs after you install the application that downloads and executes another malicious JavaScript package called plain-crypto.js. That JavaScript package is interesting in its own right. It's a dropper that checks the victim's operating system and then downloads a platform-specific second stage, so either AppleScript for Mac OS, PowerShell and VBScript for Windows, or Python for Linux. And where despite being different operating systems and different programming languages, they all implement the exact same remote access Trojan logic down to like the command and control communication, the commands it can run, and the behaviors for it. So like totally perfectly ported type of attack in this case for that second stage. The Trojan that runs it will try and figure out like what system it's on, some basic info stealing. It's got commands for things like self-termination to hide its tracks, can run arbitrary scripts and shell commands, and it can even run arbitrary applications either through reflective injection on Windows or just decoding and executing on Mac OS or Linux. So the maintainer for the lead maintainer for Axios published a postmortem on GitHub just a couple days ago. They didn't give a huge amount of details, but they said that they were the victims of a targeted social engineering campaign or attack that led to a remote access Trojan running on their own laptop, which gave the attackers access to the NPM account credentials, basically the keys they would need to upload a new version of Axios. They actually did that 2 weeks before this attack. This was back in the end of March timeframe. And it wasn't until just a little bit ago that they uploaded this malicious version, I think on March 31st or so. Now, this was first detected within minutes by members of the community. They were opening issues on the Axios GitHub project to say, hey, there's malware in here. But the threat actor was using their keys to delete all of those issues too, to try and mask it for as long as they could. Up until it was all resolved about 3 hours after detection, which is pretty dang quick. But like this is one of, if not the most popular JavaScript package there is. Like if you build an application that needs to act as a web client to communicate with other web resources, you are almost certainly going to use Axios under the hood because it's a really powerful library for this. In fact, that Claude Code thing we just talked about, if you downloaded and installed the Claude Code source code during that 3 hour window, it uses Axios under the hood, and it would have grabbed this malicious package and compromised your system there too. The maintainer had a couple of takeaways. Like they noted that they were publishing from their personal account, which was a risk they said could have been avoided. They instead should have been using like an OpenID Connect workflow with immutable release setup, basically programmatically build and deploy these packages instead of doing it from the same account that they log into to go download other stuff from NPM. They mentioned there's no automated way to detect an unauthorized publish to their package. Like they only found out because the community found out. It's not like they got an alarm saying someone published an update at 1 a.m. Your time that was unexpected. And they also just stated the obvious, saying that open source maintainers with high impact packages are clearly an active target. And I think that is absolutely true. We've seen so many both opportunistic and very targeted supply chain compromise recently.
Yeah.
And maybe like we can talk a little bit about that one that you were just hinting at as well too, that resulted in Cisco's source code getting leaked just this last
Essentially,
week,
there
too.
was a like I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point, but there's a SaaS application called Tivi that's I believe associated with authentication, but it had a breach, lost a ton of credentials, and Cisco uses it. So the credential leak associated with Tivi was the root cause of getting into Cisco's network. And the threat actor got very deep into Cisco's network and ended up stealing source code again. So worth going in another session, but Tivi is a SaaS application used by many companies. Like to me, these are two different types of, we're seeing either repositories, the one we're talking about right now with Axios, very popular, or popular SaaS applications that lots of big companies use. If you can get a credential, that credential being root cause, it kind of reminds me of the Okta breach that MGM suffered from. Many companies ended up having a breach after that, all kind of based on Okta credentials. So it just feels like the digital and software supply chain risk is really, like our predictions the past 2 years have said, becoming the biggest issue outside of protecting yourself, one of the biggest things driving problems and breaches.
It absolutely is. And because like if they can get access to this, like it's really difficult to detect a lot of these types of breaches too. Like this Axios supply chain one, the developer didn't detect it. They were probably asleep
Yeah.
because it was at 1 a.m. their time, but it was only thanks to the community that anyone spotted it.
And this was a smart threat actor, that the level of access they had allowed them to even start deleting community messages and all the administration and log cleanup they were doing to try to stay as persistent as possible. It's hard. And for the SaaS applications too, when you have a provider like Okta or Tivi and you trust them, it's a valid credential. There's nothing wrong with the credential. So until you know about that other breach, you as a victim, like you say, it's definitely a hard type of breach to catch when it comes through a supply chain venue.
Yep. So if you are a software developer, keep an eye on which version of Axios you may have had installed over the last couple of weeks. If it was 114.1 or 030.4, consider your computer compromised and any secrets that touched it compromised, and start an incident response on it. But moving on, Corey, so the last thing I wanted to talk about, I saw this post show up on a bunch of different subreddits I follow, from like cybersecurity to privacy to Microsoft to a few others. And I don't want to spoil it, but it feels like it may not be as like black and white as it comes off at, but it's an interesting concern that got leveled by this organization called Fairlinked, which is claiming to represent a bunch of LinkedIn users and like LinkedIn tool developers, that they published on a website called browsergate.eu, which basically describes what they allege are a bunch of violations of the EU Digital Markets Act. So I don't think we've talked about the EU Digital Markets Act on here before, maybe when it was first ratified back in 2022, but it's an EU regulation that limits the market power of large digital platforms to try and help develop competition within them. So basically, it labels dominant tech companies as gatekeepers, and then mandates obligations around third-party access. So for example, Google is a gatekeeper for Android, Apple is a gatekeeper for iOS. It mandates things like app stores to allow other people to install applications. It mandates rules around interoperability with other applications. And it even mandates data access for authorized organizations, even in some cases like personal customer data. to make sure that just because this company has a monopoly on this market, they can't crowd out other organizations that want to help cater to that market too. In 2024, Microsoft was designated as a gatekeeper for both Windows and LinkedIn. The act mandates that they provide free, effective, high quality, and continuous real time access to all data that is generated through the use of LinkedIn to authorized third parties. So, not like provide it publicly to everyone, but they can have a vetting process and then say, okay, you are authorized to have access to this data to provide whatever service or tool you want to on top of LinkedIn. I think if you had like a recruiting platform like monster.com and they wanted to integrate within LinkedIn, Microsoft has to provide that sort of integration capability with someone like monster.com or some other jobs forum, for example. So this BrowserGate website basically says Microsoft is violating the act. They're accusing them of what they call compliance theater with inadequate APIs and misleading public statements while shutting down companies that want to offer tools built on top of LinkedIn. They go on to allege criminal behavior too. They say that LinkedIn has started injecting malicious code into users' web browsers, which downloads a list of over 6,000 software products and then brute forces the detection of each of those products on victim machines too. Basically, it's got this list of potential tools that might interact with or use LinkedIn, and it tries to see if users are using any of them. Does it by directly sending queries to like a standard API that Chrome extensions use, tries to fetch known files from extensions that might be installed from their web accessible resources, and it even tries to detect manipulations of the DOM, basically the web page for LinkedIn, which other tools might manipulate in order to provide other services on top of LinkedIn. They gave some like specifics in there. They basically said it scans for 600 or 762 LinkedIn specific tools for productivity, content creation, and networking. Tools that the Digital Markets Act explicitly requires LinkedIn to accommodate. Says it scans for 209 sales and prospecting competitors. These are the tools that would compete with LinkedIn's own Sales Navigator product, which is $1 billion a year product. Say 509 job search extensions. And then it looks for VPNs and ad blockers and other security related tools too. They claim that it does like job profiling. Basically, if they see 3 people from watchguard.com email addresses all have this one tool detected, then they assume that WatchGuard is using that tool as a company, which can give them an unfair advantage too. So basically, they claim that all of this is illegal under both various GDPR provisions, the Digital Marketplace Act as well, the e-privacy directive, which is the directive that is responsible for all those like cookie acceptance banners that we have on every website these days, and specific privacy laws in Germany, the UK, even the United States and California with CCPA and CIPA. But like the reason I thought this wasn't necessarily black and white is the first thing that stood out to me was this isn't like a person making the claim or like another company, specific company that's been harmed. This is basically, it looks like a law firm that spun up like an LLC in Germany to then create this website to go put them on blast and try and get everyone on the internet to submit like claims, notifications.
The regulation version of a patent troll law firm.
Like I could see maybe they were like, maybe these are legitimate tools that are trying to compete with LinkedIn, and this is the only way that they can get their message out. But the fact that there's so much like, well, now that I'm thinking about it, it is a German law firm and they are very privacy conscious in that country.
Yes, they are.
Maybe there's a reason where they want to protect their identity instead of like coming out and saying exactly who is behind this particular thing. But the other thing is like, I think there is some reason to like want to do fingerprinting for things like VPNs or ad blockers. Like there's a legitimate reason for a company to try and protect against fraudulent use of their website and tools. But it does sound like it on the face of it that Microsoft might be going too far with some of this fingerprinting too. And that's where it gets like.
The thing is too, even with the legitimate, like even though something's legitimate done for some reason doesn't mean a company can't monetize it in a bad way too. Like there's a legitimate reason for an ISP to see every domain we visit. But at the same time, when we pay for them, we don't want them to sell all that information to the highest bidder and create a personal profile for us that knows our political opinion and everything else. And yet we know companies do that. So it is one of those dangerous areas where even the legitimate reasons for doing some of this, how do we know they're not doing something to monetize it beyond the scenes, beyond the legitimate reason?
And it also, like, I think it's another example of how powerful fingerprinting can be within the context of a web browser. Like Google Chrome in this case, which like almost every single web browser is
I
built
think
off of
within the
Chromium now.
context of anything, but keep
Yeah.
going. Yeah.
Like it's got a lot of power on the endpoint of figuring out who the user is ultimately based off of like behaviors of just like metadata of the tools they have installed and
This
how
is the
they're working.
metadata, I think, of anything digital. I remember when the Patriot Act first came out, where they can basically start looking at the metadata of internal domestic calls. People are like, oh, it's not the call. They're not listening into your call. But you don't realize how much metadata, just the number, the location, the tower it went in, how long the call lasted, who the other number was. Like you say, the browser is the same thing, but with all kinds of secret headers behind the scenes that humans aren't aware contain a crap load of metadata. So yes, agree 100%. And it's not just browsers. Any digital communication leaves this trail of metadata that you can fingerprint a lot of information from.
And the EU has already tried to tackle some of this, like with that e-privacy directive. So directive different from regulation, directive meaning each member country has to make their own law for it, versus GDPR, which is a regulation that the entire EU apparatus creates. But basically, like the e-privacy directive is why we have all those consent banners for cookies, because by default, they shouldn't be able to access files on your file system like a cookie without your consent. And the authors of this BrowserGate actually point to that as one of the laws that Microsoft is breaking, that by fetching all the Chrome extensions, they are fetching information from the user's endpoint without their consent. That should be a violation of the law. But like what I'm getting at, aside from that tangent, is this feels like something the EU might need to tackle with something more like pinpointed towards like browser fingerprinting itself, because it's clear that companies are trying to circumvent like the spirit of a lot of these data privacy laws by going after metadata instead of just
force
straight up.
them to track cookies, they move to super cookies. You make super cookies less effective, they find a new way to get the data. Yep, agree.
And like as a privacy conscious individual, like it is something I personally would support. Like I don't like without consent any website being able, maybe not any, but many of the most powerful websites being able to figure out exactly who I am just based off of fingerprints like this from my web browser.
Important. I do know half the time they're just trying to find useful marketing information, which could benefit us too. I mean, maybe we do want to see ads that are only showing us stuff we're interested in, not the other crap, but we have to know when they're using that data for things we don't really expect. And people forget how powerful marketing data about just you knowing who you are, what you do, what you prefer. There's a reason people protect privacy. All of social, like that's pretexting. That is a pretexting playground for every social engineer. The social engineer, like people who think privacy is not connected to security, and that if you're not a criminal, you don't need to worry about it. I'm sorry if you're out there and you think that, you're stupid. It's all that privacy information that the social engineers love that do convince you to do dumb things you shouldn't be doing, because you forgot you've already told the whole world who you are behind the scenes in social media and with all this metadata that's being transferred behind the scenes. So
well
privacy
said.
matters to security. End of story.
So I would at least recommend like going to browsergate.eu, reading through what they've written down and making your own conclusions on this. And if you do agree with what they're saying, their call to action is they've got a pre-filled complaint form that you can send to, if you're in the EU, every EU data protection authority. If you're in California, similarly there. If you're not neither of those, you're kind of screwed, because those are the only places on earth that seem to have good data privacy laws these days. But I would like to see at least something addressing the browser fingerprinting question on what should be legal and what shouldn't be legal with some additional protections. I'm also one of the 0.1% of the people in the world that still uses Firefox, though. So maybe my opinion isn't super valid. I don't know.
I
But
haven't really done it that much, but so far script safe and no script are not on the list. So at least I can still use my security extensions.
that's true. You can still at least use those, but they will know what other tools you're using and maybe use that for a competitive advantage when it comes time to asking you for sending you a sales pitch over something. But man, I don't know. I feel like the cat's out of the bag a bit too much for privacy these days on the internet.
I think we all gave it away back in the MySpace days, and it's just continued with every social media network since then. People did not realize why that stuff was free.
At least in the
It's normal business to take all of this data you're happily sharing with them digitally.
At least in the MySpace days, it was limited to like what crappy music I really enjoyed listening to.
I bet your tastes weren't crappy. Maybe they've changed.
Parents called it angry music. And, sometimes I still like angry music.
I feel like that's every teenager. And I agree with you. There's days for that good music.
But you're right.
Machine.
Yes.
Actually, things like this make me want to play angry music.
I agree. Let's go put on some Rage Against the Machine is very fitting for that. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. If you have any questions on today's topics or suggestions for future episode topics, you can reach out to us on Blue Sky. That's what it's called. I'm at itsmark.me, Corey's at Secondep, and the both of us.
Gray Sky.
It's not Gray Sky.
It's just in Seattle. Actually, we're beautiful today.
I'm a little jealous. It's cold as hell here in Austin, Texas.
Wow, that's a flip.
It is a flip. And speaking of flip, see you all on the flip side. Thanks again for listening, and you'll hear from us next week.
Ciao.
Ciao.